Well, one of the projects that we're doing here in the Zettelkast is we're working on a joint writing project. 5 people and 5 Zettelkastens. We're creating a story, which we're using a working title is the Roanoke Project because it involves a group of people that were stranded in a given confined area and then disappeared, but they've left behind clues. They've left behind their Zettelkastens. And so it's something of a mystery story. And today's first activity is tangentially related to that story. I'm a character person, you know me. I love the character side of everything. So plot is probably great for other writers, most writers, but for me, it's the characters. And so my activity is getting a little bit to know our characters that we have in mind. The request was that you pull a card from your Zettelkasten that brings to mind a character, and then you explain to us why that card brings that character to mind for you. So who would like to go first in our project?
I have sort of 2 answers for this first activity. And the first one is the people on the planet that we now think of as
Lydia.
good try. What? Best try?
Nice Try is the name of their
Nice try.
colony. Yeah.
Sorry about that. All right. The point is, they were watching Earth for a long, long time. And they noticed that there was this one place that were building Zettelkastens. No place on Earth was doing this activity except the Roanoke colony. And they decided that they wanted to have a working Zettelkasten on their desks too, right? So they were looking over shoulders, kind of virtually trying to figure it out. And they finally came to the conclusion that they couldn't figure it out that way. They had to have a teacher. So they sent an emissary down to Roanoke colony to make a proposal. Hey, one of you guys come and teach us, and this is what we'll give you in exchange. Da dee da dee da dee da. Right. So that's story 1. And the other one is the Time Twins. And the Time Twins are Kairos L or Carousel, right? And a Kairos O. Carousel is a girl, and she represents the cycles that of life that we all everything goes through. And Kairos O means opportune. So he's the just in time. Oh, I see. And the move, the one who takes advantage of the thing at the exact right time. And so together they are the Time Twins. So that's my my contribution for the week. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Deb. Amazing. You always hit the depths. It's just, I don't know how you immediately go deep dive right to the heart of issues and then bring them back up in a manageable number of words. It's astounding.
Well, Mel was the one who put me on this time thing. I went into a deep rabbit hole from last week about time. So thank you, Mel.
This is an idea that has kind of percolated ever since we started talking about this. And so for me, the card that I pulled it's from Marshall Branch, which is my main male character in my novel, because in my mind, everything relates back to that work in some way. So if I need to come up with something new or different or need a point of reference, that's always what I spin off of. And something that I wrote for him was he is a collector of artifacts. And I love this idea of having items that somehow inform the place or the people And so that led me to my bib card for a book by Nick Bantock, which is called Urgent Second Class. It's creating curious collage, dubious documents, and other art from ephemera. So you have things in here like fake postcards, fake passports, collections of fake money. Like everything in here is made up ephemera from places and things that don't exist. So that set me thinking, okay, I love the idea of including an unreliable narrator. So my thought is this narrator, because we know that we have the components of play, informed play and misleading play. So I thought, what if we introduce this person whose job is they are a creator of ephemera. And so we can, our character, let's say Jenna, can find an entry or a note card that's entirely fabricated, but she thinks that it's something that's actually valuable. I just think it could be a fable or a flash story within the story, but something that allows her to discover something she needs to discover, but as a result of an artifact from our unreliable narrator. So that's my thought.
Ooh.
Interesting. Depth there too, of a different kind, depth of the plot.
She's a plotter.
Yeah, very
That's my
much.
job.
Okay, who's next?
I have
Well,
a
I'll go
question.
next. Oh, go ahead, Deb.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I have a question. This phrase, unreliable narrator, is that a thing or is something that you created?
That's an actual thing. When you start talking about the points of view of a story, your points of view could be just the actual characters participating in telling the story as they experiment or as they experience it. So that's pretty reliable because you're in their heads, you're seeing things unfold, and you're seeing their reactions authentically in real time. So you're reading that as a reliable story. There is a conceit that takes place both in mass market and literary fiction that's called the unreliable narrator. Now, there are many things that can make them that way. One is the narrator is telling the story, but it includes the blind spots or things that they can't or don't know. And so as the reader, at some point in that story, you're reading along and you're going, wait a minute, this is not what that is. And you realize that the narrator telling the story has misled you, either intentionally, which sometimes happens in a mystery. Maybe the narrator is the villain or the bad guy, and so he's telling the story as if he's the hero from his perspective, and you realize at some point he's completely unreliable because he's trying to make himself look better in the way that he's telling the story.
Yeah.
Or it can be, so that could be very directed and on purpose, but it can also be accidental when you find out maybe, at the end of the first half of the book or the story, you realize that the person telling the story is clinically insane or is institutionalized or is impaired in some way that you realize, holy cow, this is completely unreliable. And then the reader goes through the exercise of actually figuring out what's going on. So it can be really fun.
Sounds like, okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All
Who's
right.
going next?
I'll go next.
Okay.
Before I get into my cards, I want to just reminisce for a moment because Victoria, when you said these made up ephemera, you reminded me of I was kind of a little snot in high school, and there was a particular class. It was a history class, and I really didn't like the teacher. And I remember for one of the essays that we had to write, we had to describe some country. We got to choose the country, and man, I made up so much facts about this country. It was Brazil. It had man-eating ants. It had, I don't even remember everything I put in there. I made up sources, and I got an A, which, didn't really raise my esteem for this teacher, my respect, because, she didn't catch it. But, I had fun doing that. And, it was fun, even though it was really bad also. But anyway,
And that, my friend, is why we love you. That's awesome. Now I'm wondering, did I ever read student work that was totally untrue? I'm like, oh, crikey.
well, this was before widely available internet. So I think it might be a little
Yeah.
bit easier to catch now if you went looking. But, at the
Yeah.
time, you couldn't
Cool.
just Google a book and see if it was real or not.
Right. That's awesome.
But for our assignment today, I spoke some episodes ago about this character idea I had of, somebody who, for whatever reason, congenital or otherwise, wasn't able to join the link until like an advanced age, much older than typical. And so this character is not entirely comfortable with the link, because they spent more sort of formative time being alone in their own mind. So I think that that's a really interesting thing to explore. And so I went looking in my Zettelkasten for, something about like individualism or something along those lines. And I found a couple of cards that are really interesting that could add some more depth to this. And the first one was from Schumacher, E.F. Schumacher in A Guide for the Perplexed, which I know I've mentioned him before. And I had a note that apprehending the inner experiences of others is impossible without first developing the inner experiences of oneself. And so I'm wondering how that would play out in a world where that's no longer true. Because if you're linked with other people, then you would immediately know the inner experiences of others and without doing any work necessarily. Maybe that's how it works. We'll have to explore and find out. And then the other thing that I found when I was looking for individuality, I found an index entry for the intrinsic value of aliveness, which came from the book Alone Together by Sherry Turkle, where I think this book is about 10 years old now, maybe a little bit more, but she was exploring sort of two sides of artificial intelligence as it was at the time, sort of how machines were becoming more intelligent, more alive seeming, at the same time as the internet and the experience of interacting with people on the internet were making people less human, more machine-like. So she was exploring sort of both sides of those, that question of, what does it mean to be alive? And she had given an example very early on in the book of taking her daughter to a Darwin exhibit, which had live Galapagos tortoises. A couple of them had been flown into this exhibit, and the tortoises were just sitting there, as tortoises do. And her daughter was like, why did they even bother bringing these tortoises all the way here? A robot could have done just as well. And she was just utterly shocked by her daughter saying this. And so she started asking the people in the line, because it was a long line, and many of the children agreed, yeah, why, cause so much trouble to the tortoises to bring them all this way? It's not doing anything for us. Why not have just robots? But then the parents that she talked to were like, the fact that they're alive is the whole point, right? And I had a whole line of responses to this, a whole bunch of cards, but the one that I think that is most interesting in this sort of constructed world that we're talking about, I said, let's see. The impression left by a wild animal free in its own environment is not the same as that animal captive. The captive animal is simply a representation of the experience in its native state, not the experience itself. Like, because, you know, I tend to go with the kids. Like, why do we need to inconvenience the poor tortoises when, you know, going to the Galapagos Island and seeing them in their native habitat, that would be a real experience of, you know, of them, of how they are. Seeing them sitting in some pen in the middle of a museum, it's not really what they are. You know, photography or artwork or simulations of how they really are would be more effective, I think. And so I don't quite know how this is all going to fit in, but I feel like, you know, with our games, with our constructed environment, with, you know, it sort of being almost like a Disneyland to start with, obviously, that has grown and developed in its own way over the centuries. I think that these are some ideas that could be fun to play with.
Wow. Thank you. Very interesting.
Yes, very.
Wow.
What we're looking at is about a quasi art form called Neurographica, which hit my radar, as things do, through my YouTube feed. I might be able to, I actually have one example of a really shallow Neurographica art form, but I'll just do it with my hands. It's a way of drawing lines. Well, first of all, it's meant to be a psychological explorer transformative process. And so you begin by framing in your mind a challenge, a question that you have. You get yourself very calm, and then you draw very freely lines across a sheet of paper, and then you draw other lines just following your heart, and you cross those lines, and then a few more, and you create these intersections, and then there are some steps that you follow to round out the intersections and to find the shapes that you have created in there, and then you decorate it in certain ways. And the whole thing, this refers to a presentation by a woman. There are many people who present it. I really like hers. Her name is, she seems to be like, I don't know, her name is some sort of Scandinavian name. Anyway, I'll share the link to this, but it's Introduction to Neurographica, a transformational drawing practice. So this is a link to that. And my question about this is, well, where are the limits? Are the limits, you have, if you're drawing with a Sharpie, then you've got this rather crude tool that you're drawing with. You're drawing on a flat piece of paper, so there's that. And just in kind of idly wondering about this, a character came up. And we could probably share the little story where I kind of hint at what she does for our people who follow us. We can share it in the Google Drive. But the character's name is Estelle, and she takes Neurographica beyond personal psychology, and this is an understatement. So actually the link between a character who might do this and the fact that, well, Neurographic ought to be in my Zettelkasten, it all kind of, I played catch up with myself. But the idea definitely formed as I was exploring this character named Estelle, that, oh, how might she do Neurographica?
Now I've got a whole new rabbit hole to go down.
Very, very interesting. Well, I guess it's on me now. I'll share my screen as well. So here's the card. Okay. And this card takes a concept of dimensionality that, we are comfortable with in mathematics, and then it takes a simple logical syllogism and puts the two together. And it basically says, okay, the universe is good. Good always triumphs. In our dimensions, good does not always appear to triumph. Therefore, there must be higher dimensions such that taken as a whole, good triumphs. Mathematics demands this. And of course, there was a point in time in life where people would say, wait a minute, you can't invent higher dimensions. You don't have any right to pull those out of your hat. We have what we have. Well, then along came quantum physics, and along came string theory, and suddenly string theory, needed a few, like 17 or in the 20s. No problem. If the mathematics demands them, you get them. If string theory describes the universe and it requires extra dimensions, well, then the universe just must have those extra dimensions. And nobody seems to have any problem with it. So therefore, I'm comfortable with the universe is good. Good always triumphs. Therefore, we must have higher dimensions since it does not appear to always triumph in our current dimensions. Now, the character that this brings to mind for me is a character who is somewhat simplistic in their statements or their pronouncements, a character who doesn't speak a whole lot, but appears to be perhaps on first impression seems to be one of the, shall we say, less gifted members of the community because of making statements that other people would say, humph, there's no reason to believe that. And yet still has a valuable contribution to make and might indeed be capable of some insights that others who are capable of more complex reasoning cannot see their way through because of all of the challenges. And along that line, I made a personal reflection card, which just occurred to me, because things pop into your mind when you're working with the Zettelkasten. There's no way to keep that from happening, nor would you want to. But I thought about physics again. We have this basic law of conservation of energy. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Well, what about emotional energy? Can it be created or destroyed? What about, say, enthusiasm, for example? We already talk about whipping up enthusiasm. Isn't that creating energy? And we talk about dampening enthusiasm. Well, that's destroying energy. So how is it that emotional energy, psychic energy, can be created and can be destroyed? Is it then not subject to the laws of conservation of energy in the physical world? And then, is there any kind of limit to how much can be created? This becomes important because you're now dealing with characters who have neural links to one another. And that means that they have unlimited ability to share their emotional energy with one another. And we all know what happened on Forbidden Planet. Creatures from the id. Could that be what happened to the colony?